Hello, my name is Tatiana Shchekina. I'm a designer and animator and I'm currently based in New York City. Over the past 14 years, I got a chance to work as a motion designer in television, advertising agencies, and in-house at big companies like Microsoft, AT&T, and Amazon. Here is my showreel. This is my first presentation and I want to thank Maxon for this incredible opportunity. I'm very honored to be here because Cinema 4D is actually the reason why I'm a motion designer and not an architect. I was studying architecture and interior design at college when I first opened C4D. I was mostly using it for visualization of my student projects. It was around 2004-2005 and there were very few tutorials online. Everyone I knew used 3D Max, so I couldn't really ask anyone how to make something in cinema. I found out that designers in a local TV company are using C4D in their workflow. So I went to the TV company to learn more about cinema, and I ended up as full-time motion designer working on all sorts of visual content for the award-winning TV channel. I never get back to architecture, and I'm very happy with being a motion designer. Although cinema brought me into a motion design world, I wasn't really able to use it that much in my day-to-day workflow back then. Deadlines in television were crazy tight and it used to take a very long time to render something in 3D. So I got very comfortable with After Effects instead. A few years ago, I set a goal for myself to get that much comfortable with Cinema 4D and get better at 3D in general. My presentation today is for designers and animators who are very comfortable with After Effects and 2D graphics in general and want to get into 3D but don't really know where to start. You will see how easy it is to jump into the 3D world with Cinema 4D. I will cover things like creating a 2D looking 3D environment, adding animated 2D characters to a 3D scene, recreating a 2D animation in Cinema 4D. On my journey to get better at Cinema 4D, I've decided to start with combining 2D and 3D. For example, like I did in this little animation. This is my metaphor for being a motion designer. I really enjoy swimming and being in the water, but sometimes you have to work really hard to stay where you are. Often it feels like you didn't make any progress. Motion design is developing really fast, and you have to put a lot of effort to keep up with all the changes. But this process is also super fun and enjoyable. I built a swimming pool at Cinema 4D. I also created a character reference in 3D. Then I made this character in Illustrator, rigged it with Duke, and animated in After Effects. I'm going to show you how I created this swimming pool. There are multiple ways to create a swimming pool, and I'm going to show you just one particular way that I used for this project. I'm going to my Primitives tab and I'm going to grab a plane. I'm going to adjust the size of a plane, and I only need one segment in this case. Then I'm going to make this object editable by pressing this button. It means that now I can manipulate with its points, edges, or polygons by switching these modes over here. I'm going to the Edges mode and I'm going to select all the edges. Right click and grab Extrude. Then I'm going to extrude the edges and I can adjust an amount of my extrude over here. Then I'm gonna go to Polygons mode, select Center Polygon, then hit D to extrude again. It's -90. Then I'm going to go back to my edges mode and then extrude again. And now it should be fairly large because this is our background for this scene. Polygons mode again, selecting polygons on the side, hit D, and extrude again. This time it's just -6. We got some weird polygons on the side and we can just go ahead and delete them. Oops. And here we go. We have a very primitive, simple swimming pool, which works perfectly for this project because it's very 2D stylized. Now let's create a stairs for it. I'm going to shine my swimming pool by pressing these two dots and holding Alt. And I'm going to press this button to see the rest of my views. The view from the top, front, or right. I'm going to the right view. To create my rails, I'm going to use a tool called Sweep. It allows you to use one object as a path and then wrap different object around this path. So I will need a rectangle, adjusting the size, and adding some rounding. Now I need to make it editable and go to points mode. Uncheck this button, which calls closed line. Now select this point and set first point. Remove points that we're not going to use. And adjust this. Now we need to grab a circle. Adjust the radius. And now I'm going to make this spline and the circle a child of a sweep tool. I need to change the direction of my circle. And here we go. We have one of our rails ready to go. Now we can whether copy it or make the sweep tool a child of a symmetry object. Bam! 2 rails. The last thing we need to do is to create steps, and it's super easy. I'm gonna use a cylinder out of primitive tab and collinear object. So let's adjust the cylinder. And now I'm gonna grab my collinear tool out of MoGraph tab. It works similar to a repeater tool on the shape layer in After Effects. So I'm going to make this cylinder a child of a collinear object. And I'm gonna adjust this collinear. And here we go, we got several steps. And now we just need to adjust the position of the steps. Great, our rails are ready. Let's adjust the position of the rails in the pool. I can group it, call it stairs, and then kind of move it around to get it into place. Awesome, so we have our pool ready to go. Let's move on to texturing and lighting of our scene. I'm going to grab interactive render regions so we can see better what's going on here. In order to get this 2D grainy look, we usually need several components. One of them is your light source. In this case, it's infinite type with hard shadows, and it has a material applied to it. Let's look at it closely. I only have an alpha channel in my material, and I have a noise applied to it. You can play with those settings to get the results that you need. Another important part is ambient occlusion in your render settings. You can find it under Effects above Caustics. Here you can play around with your gradient color, and your samples need to be pretty low usually, and you should have some contrast in those settings. Now let's see how I set up my materials for this scene in the example of tile material. So let's share this water, and let's remove our current tile material. You can see that I have this material applied to an internal part of the pool. Now I will show you how I did it. You need to select your pool and go to polygons mode. Now you can select polygons that you need to apply your material to. Then you go to select, set selection, and here you can name your selection tiles. Now let's create a new material, apply it to our pool, and throw this tile selection to selection tab. Now you can see that we have different materials applied to our swimming pool. Let's set it up. In general, with these 2D looking environments, you usually work with luminance channel of your material. Here you can go to texture, surfaces, and grab tiles. So it's a default setting, and of course we need to play around with it and adjust it. Let's adjust the colors. So it's kind of dark gray and gray. And we also need to adjust the grout width and bevel width. Awesome, so now it's kind of closer to where we need to be. Right now the projection mode is incorrect. We need to change it to cubic. And we need to change the scale of our tiles. Awesome. Now we have this tile material. It's still too clean looking, but we can easily fix it by mixing up the tiles with shader that we have on the background. In order to do this, you need to go to your luminance tab and create a layer. And here you can layer up different things on top of each other and mix them up with blending mode. Let's go to a white background material. And here I have a cell shader, which is this dark blue for shadows and gray for diffuse. We can just easily copy the shader, then go back to our tile material, create shader sketching tune cell, and then we can paste the shader, remove the necessary one. And in this case I used multiply blending mode. Awesome. Now you see that we set up our tiles material for the swimming pool. Another thing I did is I added figure, which you can find in this primitive tab, and I used it as a guide for my 2D character when I was creating it in Illustrator, so it matches this perspective. Awesome. And the last step we need to finish the scene is to go to After Effects and compose everything here. Here in After Effects I have a static image of my pool that I rendered out of Cinema, and then I used several layers for my swimmer animation. So here it is, my character fully animated, and one layer is underwater, and it has a turbulent displays applied to it to kind of imitate this underwater distortion. And then I have another layer that it's above the water, and it has no distortion on it. And there's also a shadow layer, which is the same character animated, but with some dynamic grain on top of it. Awesome. So now you see how easy it is to create a 2D looking 3D environment and combine 2D and 3D. After I became comfortable with creating a combination of 2D and 3D, I've decided to go to the next step and make a title sequence using Cinema 4D, Octane, Xparticles, and Forester plugins. I'm a huge fan of the Witcher books. I was very excited when I found out that Netflix is making a TV show based on them. And I decided that my title sequence is going to be for this upcoming show. The challenge was to make this title sequence look different from the Witcher game, because CD Projekt Red established a very strong visual style for it. The game has a very realistic depiction of Geralt, monsters, and the world itself. In my title sequence, I've decided to bring the story back to the folklore origin. I did it by using silhouettes, dark colors, and an atmospheric environment. I set up an environment with Forester plugin and Octane in Cinema. Then I animated silhouettes in After Effects and applied them as animated texture to a plane. I can show you how I did it. So here I have my Octane setup. In this window you can see your render, and this is Octane Node Editor, which allows you to edit your materials. Now I'm going to show you how easy it is to set up an environment with Forester plugin and Octane in Cinema 4D. If you go under your plugins in Forester and grab a tree, and here you have an incredible tree library where you could choose basically anything you need. I used this tree for my Witcher title sequence. You can adjust seed here and a lot of other tree parameters. They even have a hyperwind option. Next step is to grab a landscape object from your primitives tab. And then you adjust it to the way you wanted your landscape to be in your scene. And then there are several tools to distribute your trees around this landscape. One of them goes with Forester and it's called Multicloner, and another one is part of Octane and it's called Octane Scatter. I'm gonna show you the way I did it with Octane Scatter. So you can just like drop your tree at the child of Octane Scatter object, and then in distribution you're changing it to surface and dropping your landscape under here. And here you go, you have a bunch of trees, even too much for now. You can also change the seed here and adjust it with your landscape, the normal of your tree. So right now it's kind of still a little bit unified, and to add some variety we can whether copy this tree and change its parameters a little bit, like for example make it a little shorter and maybe play with the seed. And then we can also drop a random effector from Mograph tab. And in this random effector, you can randomize position of your trees and rotation. And scale if you need to, but not in this case probably.
The same exact principle applies to grass. I can just copy this octane scatter object. And then I go to plugins, Forester, and I grab multiflora object. Drop it under scatter, and then I can choose wild grass patch. I think now count is like too low. Yeah, now we're starting seeing some grass. And then the same way with the trees, we can kind of randomize what kind of grass do we have in the scene. Like we can add some bromus. So it's a different type of grass. And then play around with random effector. And with Octane you can just super easy drop Octane daylight, start playing with your forest scene. Awesome. Now we're ready to move on to the next step of this project. So here we have our environment set up and a little Geralt over here. And now we just need to add a monster to this scene. I'm going to my primitives tab and I'm going to grab a plane. The size of your plane should match the size of your rendered composition from After Effects. Then you can scale it up, but proportions should stay the same, so this way you don't distort your animation once you bring it here. So adjusting it a little bit, moving. And now I'm going to create a new Octane material. I'm going to Octane node editor, create material, Octane material. I'm going to search for image texture, and I'm going to wire it into opacity tab. In this image texture, I want to load my monster animation. And under animation tab, I'm gonna adjust how many keyframes I have and my frame rate. And I'm gonna apply this material to a plane. So now we can see that we need to invert it and change the color of our diffuse. It's a dark silhouette. And I would say we need to make it bigger. And it also facing the wrong way, so I can just like rotate my plane 180. Cool. So we have an animated monster in our scene. You can scroll the timeline and see that it's like changing the animation. So right now the only thing that is missing in this scene is a fog, because it doesn't look atmospheric or mysterious enough. And there are a lot of ways to create a fog in Octane, and I'm just gonna show you one of the ways to do it. So I'm gonna add a cube to my scene and make it very large. So it fills out the whole scene. And this is gonna be a fog. This way we would be able to control what is covered in fog and what is not. So I want to get out to be out of focus a little bit. And now we're gonna create a material for our fog. I'm gonna grab a new octane material, and it's gonna be a different type of material than the regular one. It's a specular material. So I'm gonna apply it to a cube, and I need to add scattering medium into a medium top. And now we looking for RGB spectrum, and we're gonna apply to absorption, and then copy it, and apply it to scattering. And at RGB spectrum we can control the color of a fog to make it a little bit more blue, or any other color you like. And in this tab we can play with density. I think in my scene it was fairly low, like 0.7. And we can play with phase. And one of the important thing, we need to set index in a material to 1. I think now it's not covering a monster, so we can just like move the fog a little bit. Awesome. So we recreated one of the scenes from Witcher title sequence. So you see how easy it is to add a 2D animation to a 3D environment. Now I would love to talk about recreating a 2D animation in Cinema 4D. About 3 years ago, I created a looping self-portrait animation by using shape layers and a rubber hose in After Effects. It became my avatar for all the websites because it represented my personality in a very fun way. The only thing that kept bothering me is that it's not as interesting visually as I wanted it to be, so I decided to remake it in 3D. I started with building this character in Cinema 4D by using primitives and deformers. It was also super easy to rig it with Bendy Limbs rig tool from iDesign.com. I rendered the whole scene with Redshift, and you can see it's pretty similar to Octane in setup. Here we have our render view and our shader graph. I would love to show you how easy it was to create this hair material with Redshift and Cinema 4D noises. So here we have my hair material already applied to the bottom of the hair, and I'm gonna recreate it for the top of the hair. I'm gonna start by creating a new Redshift material. So I'm going to create Redshift material. I will apply it to my hair, and it's by default super shiny because reflection is set to 1. Just need to tone it down a little bit. Then I would love to change the color of my hair. Since I already had my character built in 2D before, I wanted to use the same colors. And I got this awesome tip from Anthony Eugene at Blend Conference last year. If you go to this button, you can load any picture here and just pick the color from it. Super easy. The next thing I wanted to do is to add some roughness to my reflection. I'm gonna grab a texture node and load some surface imperfection texture in there. So the one I used is from HelloLux. Then I'm gonna grab a ramp node to be able to control the strength of my roughness. Now I need to wire my texture to ramp, and then to connect it to reflection roughness. So we can see it's kind of strong, and to be able to see better, we can actually connect it directly to surface. Now we see it's like full strength. I need to change source to Alt and then adjust my ramp. So I used this gray and this gray for my roughness. So now you see it's way more subtle. Another thing I would love to do is to add a bump to my material, and I'm actually gonna blend a couple of bumps together. Redshift has awesome bump blender tool, which I'm going to connect to overall bump input. Then I'm gonna grab a bump map, connect it to base input of my bump blender, and then I need to find C4D shader node, and I can't just directly connect it to bump map. I need texture node to do it. So the way it looks is like I'm connecting texture node to texture input in the bump map, and then I'm connecting my Cinema 4D shader to this texture. And here I can go and grab my noise and basically choose any noise that Cinema can offer. I use turbulent noise for this particular hair material with much lower scale and higher contrast. And the size of my texture was 124. Now we see that the bump itself is very strong, so we need to tone it down a little bit. This should be good. And then I'm gonna grab 3 of these nodes, hold Control, and copy it. And then wire it into bump input 0. And here I can change my noise to FBM. With a scale 101. I'm actually gonna wire it directly to surface to bump input so I can see better. Okay, let's see what's going on over here. Okay, so we got our stripes. I even would make it more contrast. And now let's see it in blend. Awesome. So we got our super cool stylized hair material. Super easy, super fast. I want to talk about the differences and similarities of an animation process in Cinema and After Effects. If you're comfortable with 2D animation, you can apply the same exact principles in 3D. Usually, to animate something, you can select this object, record your keyframe, move 10 frames ahead, move your object, and record this keyframe. It's a good idea to uncheck the parameters in here on the right that you're not going to animate, because by default, Cinema recorded the keyframe for scale and rotation as well, although we didn't change them. So the right way to do it would be to uncheck everything except position, record your keyframe, move 10th frame ahead, move your object, record another keyframe, and your object is animated. It helps you to keep your timeline clean. And speaking of a timeline, this is a dopesheet mode. It's kind of like a timeline in After Effects. You can see keyframes for all your animated objects here. Just make sure that if you go to view, your automatic mode is on. If you uncheck it, you don't see all your object. Also make sure that you have in view, show animated is on, because otherwise you would see everything that you have in your scene, and you probably don't want that, because like all these objects, they're not even animated, but they show here. So show animated. There are a bunch of really cool features that can help you animate effectively. For example, go to view, folding, unfold everything. And the same way you can fold it back. Then you can also go to view, hide unselected elements, and then the same way view, hide, unhide everything. There is a really cool feature that help you to kind of not see some keyframes in your animation without deleting them. It's called mute keyframes. For example, I have my neck and head in my scene. They move in side to side. And if I right click and press key mute, there is no animation. And I didn't need to remove it, and I can unmute them if I need to. So this is pretty cool. In general, you can press this button over here to kind of like control the scale of your timeline. Or you can go to view, link, and link view with preview range. In this case, your timeline will be connected to the scroller. So right now I see 180 frames, and if I move it, I will see 92 frames. So it's view, link with preview range. If you animate a lot in After Effects, you got used to being able to select layer, hit R to see rotation keyframes. You can do the same thing in Cinema. If you click this eye over here, you will see tracks on the left, and you can hide all the position keyframes or all the rotation keyframes and so on. There is also a thing that's very similar to Graph Editor in After Effects. It's called F-curve mode. If you click here, you can see curves for our desktop. And here, if you select it, you can choose from a wide range of presets, from linear, step, which is hold keyframe in After Effects, easy ease, F9 forever, easy in, easy out, stuff like that. Or you can manually adjust it, of course, the way you want it. There is no speed graph in Cinema, but you can kind of preview it as an overlay layer with your F-curve mode. You can do it by going to F-curve, show velocity. And now you see kind of your speed graph over here. As a part of my animation process, I love adding overshoots. Overshoot is when you extend beyond the pause and then settling back to pause. I want to give you a couple of examples on how to create an overshoot in Cinema. One of the ways is by going to F-curve mode and manipulate with your tangent. Another way is through keyframes. You can hold Control, copy your last keyframe, then extend your position a little bit, record it, and then you can kind of manually adjust it in F-curve mode. To get the overshoot that you like. Now it's actually too strong, so you can turn it down. And it's actually not everything. There is one more way to do it. If you go to your Homograph tab and select a fracture object, you can make your cube a child of the fracture object. And this way, you can use Homograph effectors. If I grab a delay and make sure that it's applied to my fracture, and then I choose spring, I can get a really cool springy overshoot. And I can adjust it here. I can even layer up several delays. Like if I grab another one in blend mode, this way I have a couple of delays applied to my cube. And this way you can kind of like adjust it and play around with settings and get overshoot that you want. Another animation principle you can easily create in Cinema is squash and stretch. So let's delete everything, and I have another cube here. So let's say it's falling down from the top. And I want to exaggerate it by adding some squash and stretch to it. Make sure that you're in the object mode in here. Then select your scale parameters and record the normal scale keyframe. Then go back here and make it really squashy. And then when your object is on the move, it would be stretched actually. So you have this kind of cool squash and stretch effect. You can offset keyframes a little bit. Awesome. There is also a way to loop your animation in Cinema. It's pretty easy. If you select your object on your timeline and go to After and select Repeat, and then you choose number of repeats, Cinema will just loop this animation forever. Not forever, I mean for the times that you put in repetitions. After I'm done polishing the animation and happy with timing, I like to do one last thing. It's adding a follow-through and making sure that all my animated objects are not stopping at the same time. Follow-through is the idea that certain body parts might continue to move even after a motion is completed. It helps to give the impression that your character or an object follow the laws of physics. I'm adding some follow-through in Cinema the same way as I would in After Effects. So for example here, I have an arm of my character stop, and then fingers are moving and they step in at the same time. So I would just grab those keyframes, offset them by one keyframe, and it's way more organic, looks more natural. Now you see how similar the animation process in Cinema to animation process in After Effects. I hope after this presentation you see how easy it is to start creating 3D scenes and animation with Cinema 4D. Thanks so much for joining. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can contact me through my website or on Instagram or Twitter. I'm TS Motion. Thanks again.